New Mexico, 1945. The first atomic fireball in history rose into the sky, and almost no one watching understood what it meant, except one man standing in the shadows. William Penney didn't cheer, he didn't celebrate, he simply opened his notebook and wrote a number. The yield, the pressure, the shock front. The estimate was perfect. Penney had just proven that the deadliest weapon ever built could be predicted by mathematics alone. For the American generals around him, the blast was a revelation. For Penney, it was confirmation. Mathematics could decode destruction with frightening accuracy. He had already calculated the fireball radius, the pressure gradients, the timing of the shock arrival, all before the bomb had ever been assembled. Trinity did not surprise him, it validated him. And from that moment, even the senior American physicists began to recognize what British advisors already knew. Penney possessed one of the most disciplined analytical minds in the entire Manhattan Project. Years earlier, long before he stood in the desert at Trinity, Penney had built a quiet but formidable reputation inside Britain. As German bombers devastated London, the government needed someone capable of explaining destruction with scientific precision. Penney modelled blast waves through narrow streets, calculated how buildings collapsed under asymmetric loads, and mapped pressure effects across terrain. While most engineers relied on empirical testing, Penney brought advanced mathematics, wave theory, elasticity, differential modelling. His work shaped air raid protection, civil defence strategy, and the placement of critical infrastructure. What others described in general terms, Penney reduced to curves, numbers, and predictable laws. That rigour caught the attention of Britain's wartime leadership. When intelligence suggested Germany might be investigating atomic fission, Britain formed Tube Alloys, its early nuclear research programme. A handful of specialists were chosen to study the possible consequences of nuclear detonation. Penney was among them. His mastery of shock dynamics made him indispensable. While physicists debated neutron cross-sections, Penney asked a different question. If a nuclear device existed, what would it do to a city? His early reports became some of the first systematic British analyses of nuclear blast effects. Quietly, his name began to circulate among senior advisors as a scientist, whose work might one day define national strategy. By 1943, Britain merged its efforts with the American Manhattan Project. Penney was sent across the Atlantic, not as a junior assistant, but as a critical analyst assigned to predict the physical consequences of a weapon that did not yet exist. Many physicists focused on achieving critical mass. Penney focused on everything that happened afterward: fireball expansion, thermal radiation, overpressure curves, ground shock, and structural survivability. American engineers depended on his aid. Calculations to place instruments, calibrate cameras, and establish safe observation distances. His equations influenced the entire architecture of the Trinity test. In the weeks before detonation, Penney refined dozens of models, narrowing the expected yield range with unusual precision. He analysed terrain, temperature layers, atmospheric moisture, and geological structures, factors most had ignored. His colleagues later recalled that Penney never raised his voice or speculated wildly. He simply checked the numbers again, refining each curve until it obeyed physical law. When the device finally exploded and the shock front rolled outward, Penney calmly closed his notebook. His prediction had been nearly perfect. But Trinity was not the end of Penney's work. It was the beginning of something far larger. Britain emerged from the war, victorious but exhausted, economically strained, and overshadowed by two nuclear superpowers. Without its own atomic program, Britain risked losing strategic influence entirely. And only one British scientist had seen a real nuclear detonation, measured it, and understood it from the inside. William Penney. Designing a nuclear weapon required a fusion of mathematics, chemistry, metallurgy, electronics, and explosive engineering. Penney had witnessed that fusion firsthand inside the Manhattan Project. He understood the secrecy, the industrial scale, and the coordination required. He knew which design paths failed, which succeeded, and which uncertainties were unacceptable. Most importantly, he carried knowledge no British institution possessed: how a nuclear weapon behaved from the microsecond of initiation to the collapse of the fireball. As Britain began planning its post-war future, it became obvious that the nation needed a scientific architect, someone capable of transforming wartime knowledge into an independent nuclear deterrent. Penney was the only scientist with the operational experience, analytical discipline, and strategic clarity to lead that effort. The war was ending, but Penney's responsibility was expanding. Britain did not simply need theoretical knowledge, it needed a reliable path into the nuclear age. And as London prepared to build its first atomic weapon, one question rose above all others. How would Penney transform Britain's nuclear ambitions once the Cold War began? Before we continue, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy historically grounded engineering documentaries. William Penney's rise into the core of Britain's scientific establishment did not begin in laboratories filled with classified documents, but in the disciplined world of applied mathematics. Long before the nuclear age took shape, Penney had already distinguished himself as a thinker capable of turning abstract theories into precise engineering tools. While many mathematicians stayed in the realm of pure theory and most engineers relied on trial and error, Penney operated in the rare space between them. His studies focused on wave behavior, elasticity, and the physics of shock, fields that seemed niche before the war, but would become the foundation for understanding the most destructive weapon ever conceived. By the late 1930s, as German rearmament accelerated, Britain quietly began assembling experts who could analyze explosive effects on modern cities. Penney joined a select group tasked with predicting structural failure under intense pressure. He calculated how bridges collapsed under asymmetrical loads, how blast waves reflected inside streets, and how energy propagated across varying terrains. These were not classroom exercises. When the Blitz began, in Ensemble Mechanismen, Penney's equations became essential for determining shelter designs and identifying weak points in critical infrastructure. Every bomb that fell on London provided new data, patterns Penney studied with the same rigour he later applied to nuclear physics. His accuracy quickly made him indispensable inside the Ministry of Home Security. It was this background, not nuclear theory, that first drew the attention of Tube Alloys, Britain's early atomic research programme. Intelligence reports suggested that atomic fission could produce an explosion far beyond conventional weapons. Physicists were needed to understand neutron behaviour, but someone also had to predict the effects of an entirely new class of shockwave. Penney's mathematical discipline made him the ideal candidate. He joined a small team tasked with examining what a nuclear blast might do to cities, factories, or military bases. His internal reports became some of the earliest British analyses of nuclear effects, converting the abstract idea of an atomic bomb into measurable physical consequences. Long before he arrived in the United States, Penney had already begun preparing Britain for the age of nuclear weapons. When Britain merged Tube Alloys with the American Manhattan Project in 1943, Penney was selected to cross the Atlantic. He entered a scientific environment unlike anything he had known, with vast resources, extreme secrecy, and constant pressure. Yet he adapted immediately. While physicists worked to achieve critical mass, Penney focused on what happened afterward: the dynamics of the fireball, thermal radiation, pressure time curves, fallout trajectories, and blast propagation across terrain. His models guided engineers in designing shock instruments, calibrating cameras, and establishing safe observation distances. Penney's role was not glamorous, but it was indispensable. He provided the quantitative framework that allowed the project to measure success with scientific precision. What set Penney apart was not dramatic brilliance, it was consistency. American engineers quickly learned that if Penney provided a value, it could be trusted. He refined variables, eliminated assumptions, and forced the models to obey fundamental physics. As the Trinity test approached, this discipline became crucial. Penney was placed on the blast effects committee responsible for determining exactly where instruments should be positioned. Cameras, pressure gauges, seismic sensors, and observation stations were all placed according to calculations he helped finalize. The layout of the world's first atomic test carried Penney's mathematical signature. When the Trinity fireball rose and matched his predictions, Penney's reputation solidified. But the experience did more than validate his models. It gave him something far more valuable: first-hand operational knowledge. He understood nuclear weapons not just as theoretical devices, but as physical events. He had seen the thermal pulse, measured the shock, observed the timing, and understood how the energy behaved across real terrain. No other British scientist possessed that knowledge. By the end of the war, Britain faced a strategic dilemma. Relying entirely on American nuclear protection risked turning the nation into a secondary power. Building an independent deterrent required expertise that few people in the world possessed. Penney was the only British scientist who had participated in the full analytical cycle of a real nuclear detonation. From prediction to measurement to post-blast analysis. He became the natural candidate to guide Britain into the nuclear age. The question was no longer whether he was capable, but whether Britain was willing to invest what it would take to follow his lead. London needed a program based on discipline, precision, and uncompromising realism. These were the qualities that defined Penney's work. His next responsibility would be to transform wartime knowledge into a national capability that could shape Britain's position in the emerging Cold War. Before we continue, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy accurate, engineering-focused documentaries. How would Penney lead Britain as it began building its first atomic weapon? When William Penney returned to Britain after the Manhattan Project, he carried something no other British scientist possessed: direct operational knowledge of how nuclear weapons behaved in reality, not theory. The government recognized this immediately. Britain had emerged from the war victorious, but weakened, economically strained, and overshadowed by two superpowers. Nuclear weapons were no longer speculative concepts. They were instruments of diplomacy, leverage, and global hierarchy. Penney was assigned to the newly created Atomic Weapons Research Establishment, becoming a central figure in determining whether Britain could develop an independent nuclear deterrent. What had once been secret wartime analysis now became the foundation of national strategy. Penney approached the task with the same discipline he had applied at Trinity: define the physics precisely, eliminate uncertainties, and build a program grounded in measurement rather than ambition. Colleagues described him as calm and understated, yet relentless in his demand for accuracy. Britain needed a device that worked on the first attempt, with no margin for error. Penney began reconstructing everything he had learned in the United States without violating the strict security rules that governed nuclear collaboration. He focused on shock behavior, compression requirements, timing systems, and energy release patterns. His wartime notebooks, filled with equations and blast curves, became analytical anchors for the new program. Engineers worked on metallurgy, electronics, chemistry, and assembly methods. But Penney remained responsible for the most critical part: predicting exactly how the device would behave at detonation. His knowledge of the Trinity instrumentation layout guided the design of British measurement systems. His understanding of blast wave propagation shaped test site requirements. His analysis of thermal radiation determined safety protocols and observation distances. Britain faced growing pressure. The United States had passed the McMahon Act, which restricted nuclear cooperation. The Soviet Union had tested its first atomic device. Time was running short, and every failure would have political consequences. Penney kept the program focused, prioritizing reliability over complexity. A failed test would damage Britain's credibility and weaken its diplomatic position. Developing a nuclear weapon required Penney to unify scientists, engineers, and military planners who often worked from entirely different technical backgrounds. He became the bridge between theoretical physics and engineering pragmatism. His experience with real nuclear detonation data allowed him to dismiss flawed assumptions before they consumed resources. He insisted on systematic testing of every subsystem, from detonator timing to shock-sensitive components. Britain did not have the industrial capacity of the United States, so mistakes had to be prevented early. Penney shaped the program around precision. Teams conducted explosive lens experiments across remote test ranges, measuring symmetry, timing, and compression yields. Penney personally reviewed the blast curves, comparing each trace to the models he had refined since Trinity. His expectations were exact. If a curve deviated, the design was revised. If timing drifted, additional tests followed. Britain did not have the luxury of waste. Every experiment had to count. As the device neared completion, the question of how and where to test it became critical. Penney helped evaluate potential sites around the world before the decision was made to conduct the test in the Australian desert. He oversaw the scientific planning for the operation, which required positioning measurement instruments across vast distances. The goal was not simply to produce an explosion. It was to extract data that would shape the rest of the program. Penney produced detailed blast prediction maps, instrumentation charts, and observational timelines. His Trinity experience influenced every decision: instrument spacing, tower height, safety perimeters, and photographic exposure sequences. British aircraft, survey teams, and engineering crews prepared for an event no nation outside the United States or Soviet Union had ever attempted. Penney ensured that the data would be scientifically meaningful and that the device would perform as expected. The detonation validated years of disciplined work. The shock front formed within predicted parameters. The thermal pulse matched Penney's calculations with narrow tolerances. The expanding fireball confirmed that Britain had successfully joined the nuclear powers. Penney viewed the moment not as triumph, but as responsibility. He understood the implications. Nuclear weapons demanded stewardship, caution, and continuous scientific discipline. His post-test analysis formed the technical foundation for Britain's nuclear doctrine, guiding decisions on weapon design, delivery systems, and safety standards. Politicians debated strategy. Diplomats negotiated alliances. Penney focused on physics. His calculations shaped decisions at the highest level. He had become one of the most influential scientific figures in Britain's early Cold War strategy. Before we continue, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy precise, historically grounded engineering documentaries. How would Penney's growing authority shape the next phase of Britain's nuclear program as the Cold War intensified? As Britain entered the 1950s, William Penney's influence expanded far beyond the design of a single bomb. The Cold War was accelerating. The Soviet Union had tested multiple atomic devices. The United States was moving toward thermonuclear development. NATO was forming its early frameworks. Britain now faced a strategic choice: rely entirely on American protection or build a sustainable, independent nuclear capability. A single successful test was no longer enough. Credible deterrence required a stable, evolving arsenal backed by a scientific institution capable of long-term innovation. Penney was appointed to lead the atomic weapons research establishment, giving him responsibility for shaping not only weapons, but the entire infrastructure that supported them. His task was immense. He had to transform wartime improvisation into a permanent technological enterprise that could design, test, refine, and deploy new systems as global pressures intensified. Penney approached the new challenge with the same discipline that had defined his wartime work. He expanded research capacity, recruiting mathematicians, physicists, metallurgists, and engineers capable of sustaining complex development cycles. Every device required mastery of explosive lenses, timing systems, neutron initiators, and thermodynamic behavior under extreme conditions. Penney ensured that every team understood the physics precisely, rather than relying on approximations. He emphasized controlled experimentation, reliable instrumentation, and validation against established physical laws. Under his leadership, Britain conducted additional tests in Australia, each one designed to refine weapon performance and measure critical variables. These operations involved atmospheric sampling, shock measurements, and detailed observations of energy propagation through desert terrain. Penney reviewed the data personally, cross-checking theoretical models with real-world results. His insistence on clarity and precision set the standard for Britain's entire nuclear infrastructure. As the Cold War intensified, the emergence of the hydrogen bomb changed the strategic landscape again. Thermonuclear weapons represented a leap far beyond the destructive power of fission devices. Their physics involved staged reactions, multi-megaton yields, and energy releases, on a scale no conventional device could match. Britain faced a crucial decision: pursue thermonuclear capability or accept permanent dependence on the United States. Penney understood the consequences of inaction. He argued that Britain needed at least limited thermonuclear development to maintain credible deterrence. The government agreed, placing Penney at the centre of the effort to evaluate and design a workable hydrogen weapon. His teams began studying radiation implosion, staging methods, and compression techniques. Britain lacked direct access to classified American data due to legal restrictions, but Penney's mathematical discipline allowed his teams to infer many of the essential principles using open scientific information combined with controlled test results. Progress was slow but systematic. Early British attempts produced boosted fission yields far below American devices. Penney remained pragmatic. Each trial provided essential data. Each miscalculation refined the next model. He kept the program focused on physics rather than headlines. After years of incremental progress, Penney oversaw a breakthrough. His teams produced a staged design with improved compression, more efficient fuel configurations, and refined timing sequences. The successful high-yield thermonuclear test that followed re-established Britain as a nuclear power capable of influencing global strategy. The achievement confirmed that Britain did not require superpower scale to produce world-class scientific results. Penney's leadership had positioned the country at the forefront of Cold War nuclear technology. Yet Penney's role extended beyond scientific development. He became one of the most trusted nuclear advisors within the British government, shaping decisions on safety, deployment, and international cooperation. His knowledge of blast physics guided storage protocols and delivery system evaluations. He assessed risks for military planners and provided scientific clarity during parliamentary debates. As NATO developed unified nuclear strategies, Penney represented Britain's technical position in high-level discussions. His expertise contributed to renewed nuclear cooperation between Britain and the United States, eventually allowing for greater technical exchange. Penney helped integrate American delivery systems with British-designed warheads, creating a more flexible deterrent. Throughout the period, he remained consistent, analytical, precise, and resistant to political pressure. He valued scientific honesty over prestige and viewed nuclear weapons not as symbols of national pride, but as tools that demanded caution and responsibility. Penney's leadership shaped every dimension of Britain's nuclear identity. His balance of scientific ambition and strategic necessity created a weapons program grounded in discipline rather than spectacle. As Britain secured its position among nuclear powers, Penney turned his attention to ensuring long-term stability and safety. He believed that nuclear weapons demanded continuous refinement, strict oversight, and a sober understanding of their consequences. His influence extended into modernization programs, submarine-launched systems, and the evolving doctrine of minimal but credible deterrence. His scientific rigor provided Britain with stability during some of the most volatile years of the Cold War. But as Britain entered a new phase of nuclear strategy, a final question emerged. How would Penney's scientific discipline guide the transition from early nuclear development to the long-term deterrent strategies that followed? By the early 1960s, Britain's nuclear arsenal had become a central pillar of national defence, and William Penney stood at the core of its scientific and strategic development. The weapons were no longer experimental designs, but operational tools integrated into a global rivalry defined by American and Soviet megaton competition. Britain faced the challenge of maintaining a deterrent that was not only scientifically reliable, but strategically credible. Penney recognised that the future of British nuclear power depended on stability, not rapid expansion. He oversaw modernisation programmes, technical reviews, and the transition from aircraft-delivered bombs to missile-based systems. The introduction of the Polaris submarine programme transformed Britain's strategic posture. Instead of vulnerable airfields, the country gained a concealed and mobile deterrent capable of surviving a first strike. Penney played an advisory role in adapting British warheads to American missiles technology, ensuring that the physics and engineering were compatible with the system's constraints. As Cold War pressures intensified, the responsibilities of the scientists maintaining Britain's nuclear credibility grew more complex. Penney increasingly focused on the technical and ethical dimensions of the arsenal he had helped build. He led committees studying blast effects, fallout patterns, environmental risks, and long-term radiation exposure. His earlier work on shock propagation guided civil defence planning and safety evaluations for storage and deployment sites. As global awareness of radioactive contamination increased, Britain reduced atmospheric tests and moved toward underground detonations and advanced laboratory models. Penney supported this transition, encouraging the expansion of computational analysis, high-speed diagnostics, and precision measurement tools. His expertise influenced Britain's position during negotiations that produced the Partial Test Ban Treaty. While political leaders debated diplomatic terms, Penney provided the scientific clarity needed to evaluate each proposal. His cautious, disciplined reasoning helped Britain align international cooperation with national security requirements. Penney's scientific influence extended far beyond nuclear weapons. He became a prominent figure in British research policy, chairing scientific councils, advising universities, and advocating for stronger national capabilities in physics, engineering, and applied mathematics. He believed that the principles behind nuclear design, including precision, collaboration, and analytical discipline, were essential for Britain's broader industrial and academic progress. His work helped establish advanced laboratories, strengthen academic programs, and elevate Britain's standing in international research. Despite his public significance, Penney remained personally reserved. He rarely discussed his wartime experiences or Cold War responsibilities outside professional circles. Colleagues described him as modest, methodical, and entirely focused on accuracy rather than recognition. As the strategic environment evolved with new missile systems, shifting alliances, and changing political priorities, Penney's guidance remained critical. His early research shaped safety protocols for weapon handling, storage, and testing. His understanding of detonation physics influenced missile integration and submarine-launched warhead procedures. His analytical frameworks continued to serve as references for nuclear effect modelling. Even after retiring from direct weapons development, Penney remained a senior advisor whose judgment carried exceptional weight. Governments facing complex nuclear decisions consistently relied on his knowledge to navigate the intersection of science, engineering, and national strategy. His influence extended into modernisation efforts that defined later phases of Britain's deterrent, ensuring continuity between early Cold War development and the evolving doctrine of minimal but credible nuclear capability. Penney's career became inseparable from the scientific history of Britain's nuclear age. He had risen from a young mathematician studying bomb damage in wartime London to the architect of Britain's atomic and thermonuclear capabilities. His notebooks had guided the world's first nuclear test. His models had shaped decades of strategic planning. The weapons he helped design ensured that Britain remained an independent nuclear power during one of the most dangerous eras in history. Despite the scale of his contribution, Penney remained defined not by ambition, but by responsibility. He understood the destructive potential of nuclear weapons more clearly than anyone else in the country. This understanding shaped his decisions, his leadership, and his approach to scientific oversight. As Britain moved from early nuclear development into long-term deterrence planning, one question remained for the generations who would inherit the systems he established. Would Britain continue to apply Penney's disciplined scientific principles as it navigated the uncertainties of the nuclear future?